America on the edge. America in the early 1930s was a nation suffocating under the weight of the Great Depression. Banks collapsed, families lost their homes, and entire towns seemed to crumble into dust. The promise of the American dream had evaporated, replaced by hunger, desperation, and a growing sense that the system had failed its people. In this bleak landscape, stories of rebellion captured the public imagination. People wanted to believe that someone, somewhere, was fighting back against the institutions that had abandoned them. And into this world stepped a young Texans, Bonnie Parker and Clyde Barrow, whose names would soon echo across the country like a warning shot. Their story is often remembered as a romantic outlaw fantasy, a tale of two lovers racing across dusty back roads with stolen money and stolen dreams. But the truth is far darker. Bonnie and Clyde were not glamorous rebels. They were products of poverty, trauma, and a world that offered them no real chance at success. Their crimes were not clever heists, but chaotic acts of violence. Their escapes were not cinematic stunts, but desperate scrambles for survival. And their love, while undeniably intense, was forged in the fires of fear, instability, and the constant threat of death. This documentary will take you from their childhoods in rural Texas to the violent ambush that ended their lives. You will see how a lonely waitress and a restless farm boy became national celebrities, how the Barrow Gang terrorized multiple states, and how their legend grew into something far larger than the truth. You will witness the brutality of their crimes, the desperation behind their choices, and the tragic inevitability of their final moments. This is not the Hollywood version. This is the real story, raw, unfiltered, and grounded in historical fact. Bonnie and Clyde did not set out to become icons. They set out to survive. But in trying to outrun the world that shaped them, they created a legacy that still fascinates America nearly a century later. Their story is a collision of love and violence, hope and despair, rebellion and ruin. And it begins long before their first crime in the childhoods that shaped who they would become. Bonnie Parker, a poet in poverty. Bonnie Elizabeth Parker entered the world on October 1, 1910, in the small town of Rowena, Texas. Her father, Charles Parker, worked as a bricklayer, while her mother, Emma, stayed home to care for Bonnie and her siblings. Their life was modest, but stable until tragedy struck, when Bonnie was just 4 years old. Her father died unexpectedly, leaving Emma to raise 3 children alone. With limited options, she moved the family to Cement City, a rough industrial neighborhood in West Dallas. The area was known for poverty, crime, and constant struggle. It was a place where dreams rarely survived. Despite her surroundings, Bonnie was bright, imaginative, and fiercely expressive. She excelled in school, wrote poetry, and dreamed of becoming an actress or a writer. Her notebooks were filled with verses about love, heartbreak, and escape, themes that would later define her life. She was small in stature, barely 5 feet tall, but carried herself with confidence and charm. Teachers admired her intelligence. Friends remembered her as lively, dramatic, and always yearning for something more. At 16, Bonnie made a decision that would alter her path forever. She married Roy Thornton, a troubled young man with a criminal streak. Their marriage was turbulent from the start. Roy drifted in and out of jail, disappearing for long stretches and leaving Bonnie alone. She refused to divorce him, even as their relationship crumbled. She continued wearing her wedding ring until the day she died, a symbol of loyalty that contrasted sharply with the life she eventually chose. By her late teens, Bonnie was working as a waitress, struggling to make ends meet. She lived with her mother, wrote poetry in her spare time, and dreamed of escaping the monotony of poverty. But escape never came. Anne, who believed in him completely. Their connection was immediate, intense, and dangerous. Not until January 1930, when she met Clyde Barrow. Bonnie was drawn to him instantly. He was handsome, charismatic, and carried himself with the confidence of someone who refused to accept the life he'd been given. Clyde saw in Bonnie a woman. Bonnie Parker was not born an outlaw. She was born a dreamer in a world that crushed dreams. Her poetry reveals a woman longing for adventure, passion, and meaning. Clyde Barrow offered all three, but at a cost she could never have imagined. Clyde Barrow. Built by hardship, Clyde Chestnut Barrow was born on March 24, 1909, near Tellico, Texas, into a poor farming family struggling to survive. His parents, Henry and Cummy Barrow, worked tirelessly to provide for their children, but the harsh realities of rural life made stability nearly impossible. The Barrows eventually moved to West Dallas, the same impoverished neighborhood where Bonnie Parker lived. Their home was a small, dilapidated shack, barely large enough for the entire family. Poverty wasn't just a condition, it was the air they breathed. Clyde was intelligent, charming, and musically gifted. He learned to play the guitar and saxophone, dreaming of becoming a musician. But dreams were fragile in West Dallas. Crime was everywhere, and opportunities were scarce. Clyde dropped out of school after the 5th grade and drifted between odd jobs. But he was restless and drawn to danger. He admired older boys who stole cars, cracked safes, and lived fast. He wanted more than the life he saw around him, and crime seemed like the only path to something bigger. His first arrest came at 17 for failing to return a rental car. Soon after, he and his brother Buck were arrested for stealing turkeys. These early crimes were small, almost trivial, but they marked the beginning of a pattern. Clyde's offenses escalated quickly. He began breaking into stores, stealing cars, and committing burglaries across Texas. He was clever, quick, and fearless, traits that made him both effective and dangerous. But Clyde's life changed forever when he was arrested in 1930 and sent to Easton Prison Farm, one of the most brutal prisons in Texas. Easton was notorious for beatings, starvation, and abuse. Clyde endured horrific conditions, including repeated assaults by other inmates. The experience hardened him, stripping away any remaining innocence. He later claimed that Easton turned him from a petty criminal into a man determined to strike back at the system that had destroyed him. When Clyde was released in February 1932, he was no longer the restless farm boy dreaming of music. He was angry, traumatized, and committed to a life of crime. He vowed never to be imprisoned again, and he meant it. His loyalty to his family remained strong, but his loyalty to Bonnie was stronger. Together, they would embark on a path that led only one direction, toward violence, notoriety, and death. The meeting, a dangerous spark. Bonnie and Clyde met in January 1930 in West Dallas, likely at the home of a mutual friend on Herbert Street. Bonnie was recovering from heartbreak and searching for purpose. Clyde was charismatic, handsome, and already living the outlaw life. Their connection was immediate. Bonnie saw in Clyde a spark. A man who refused to accept the life he'd been given. Clyde saw in Bonnie someone who believed in him completely. Someone who saw beyond his criminal record and into the person he wanted to be. Their relationship intensified quickly. Bonnie visited Clyde often, spending hours talking with him about dreams, fears, and the future. She wrote poems about him, describing a man torn between love and danger. Clyde admired Bonnie's intelligence and loyalty. She wasn't just a companion, she was a partner, someone who understood him in ways no one else ever had. But their romance was interrupted when Clyde was arrested and sent to jail. Bonnie visited him regularly, bringing comfort and hope. In a moment that would define her loyalty, she smuggled a pistol into the jail, allowing Clyde to escape. He was recaptured soon after, but Bonnie's act revealed her willingness to cross any line for him. When Clyde was sent to Eastern Prison Farm, Bonnie continued writing letters, promising to wait for him. Their bond grew stronger through separation, fueled by longing and shared resentment toward the world that had trapped them both. When Clyde was finally released in 1932, Bonnie was waiting. Their reunion was passionate, emotional, and filled with a sense of destiny. From that moment on, Bonnie and Clyde were inseparable. Their love was intense, reckless, and built on a foundation of shared trauma and desperation. They believed they were meant to escape the world together, even if escape meant breaking every law in the process. Their partnership was not a glamorous romance. It was a dangerous fusion of loyalty, rebellion, and the belief that they had nothing left to lose. The Barrow Gang rises. Clyde Barrow didn't want to be a lone outlaw. He wanted a group of loyal companions who could help him pull off robberies, evade police, and strike back at the institutions he believed had wronged him. The Barrow Gang formed gradually, beginning with Clyde, Bonnie, and Clyde's brother Buck. Buck's wife, Blanche, soon joined, along with various associates, including W.D. Jones, Raymond Hamilton, and Henry Methvin. The gang was a rotating cast of characters, each drawn into Clyde's orbit by loyalty, desperation, or the promise of fast money. Their early crimes were small. They robbed grocery stores, gas stations, and small-town banks. Despite their growing reputation, their take was usually modest, often less than $1,500. Clyde was not a master criminal. He was impulsive, emotional, and prone to mistakes. But he was also fearless, skilled at driving, and intimately familiar with the backroads of Texas and Oklahoma. These traits kept the gang alive during countless escapes. Bonnie's role in the gang has been debated for decades. Some historians argue she was an active participant, firing weapons and helping plan robberies. Others believe she was more of a bystander, loyal to Clyde but not deeply involved in the violence. The truth likely lies somewhere in between. Bonnie was fiercely loyal, willing to endure danger and hardship for Clyde. But she was not the ruthless killer portrayed in newspapers. She wrote poetry during quiet moments, documenting her life on the run with a mixture of pride and sorrow. The gang's crimes escalated in both frequency and violence. Clyde's hatred for law enforcement grew after his time in Eastern Prison Farm, and he became increasingly willing to shoot officers during confrontations. Several police officers were killed during the gang's spree, turning Bonnie and Clyde from petty criminals into national fugitives. Their escapes were chaotic but effective. Clyde's driving skills were legendary. He could maneuver a stolen Ford V8 through tight turns, muddy fields, and narrow bridges at high speeds. The gang often used stolen cars with powerful engines, allowing them to outrun police vehicles with ease. They traveled constantly, rarely staying in one place for more than a few days. Their lives were a blur of stolen cars, cheap motels, rural hideouts, and constant fear. Despite the danger, Bonnie and Clyde remained devoted to each other. Their love was the emotional core of the gang, a bond that held them together even as the world closed in around them. But loyalty could not protect them forever. The gang's crimes were becoming too violent, too frequent and too public. Law enforcement was beginning to coordinate across state lines. The Barrow Gang's days were numbered. The Joplin Raid, fame through violence. One of the most defining moments in Bonnie and Clyde's story occurred in April 1933 in Joplin, Missouri. The gang had rented a small apartment, hoping to rest and regroup. They spent their days drinking, laughing, and posing for photos, unaware that these images would soon make them infamous. Their loud behavior drew attention from neighbors, who reported suspicious activity to the police. On April 13th, officers attempted to raid the apartment. They expected to find bootleggers or petty criminals. Instead, they walked into a deadly ambush. Clyde and Buck opened fire immediately, killing 2 officers and wounding others. The shootout was chaotic, violent, and over within minutes. The gang escaped in a stolen car, leaving behind a treasure trove of personal belongings, including a camera filled with photos. These photos became national headlines. Newspapers published images of Bonnie posing with guns, Clyde leaning against stolen cars, and the gang laughing together. The public was captivated. Bonnie and Clyde suddenly had faces, personalities, and a mythology. They were portrayed as glamorous lovers on the run, rebels fighting against a broken system. The truths that they were frightened, unstable, and increasingly violent was overshadowed by the allure of their images. The Joplin photos transformed Bonnie and Clyde into cultural icons. They became symbols of rebellion during a time when Americans felt powerless. Their stories spread across the country, fueled by sensational journalism and public fascination. But fame came with consequences. Law enforcement intensified their efforts, coordinating across multiple states to track the gang. Bonnie and Clyde were no longer just criminals, they were national fugitives. The Joplin Raid marked a turning point. The gang's crimes became more violent, their escapes more desperate, and their world more dangerous. Bonnie and Clyde embraced their outlaw identities, but the pressure was mounting. Every robbery, every shootout, every escape brought them closer to the inevitable end. The photos that made them famous also made them targets. Their legend was growing, but their time was running out. The crime spree intensifies. Throughout 1933 and early 1934, the Barrow Gang continued their spree across Texas, Oklahoma, Kansas, Missouri, and Louisiana. Their crimes grew bolder, their escapes more daring, and their encounters with law enforcement increasingly violent. Clyde's driving skills remained their greatest asset. He could navigate rural backroads at high speeds, using his knowledge of the terrain to evade police. The gang relied heavily on stolen Ford V8 South, which offered superior speed and power compared to most police vehicles. Bonnie suffered a severe injury in June 1933 when a car accident left her with third-degree burns on her leg. The injury was debilitating, leaving her unable to walk without assistance. Clyde carried her during escapes, wrapped her leg in bandages, and cared for her as best he could. Despite the pain, Bonnie refused to leave Clyde's side. Her loyalty was unwavering, even as her health deteriorated. The gang's crimes included bank robberies, store burglaries, car thefts, and kidnappings. They often kidnapped civilians or police officers during escapes, releasing them unharmed hours later. These kidnappings added to their notoriety, painting them as unpredictable and dangerous. Clyde's hatred for law enforcement intensified, and he became increasingly willing to shoot officers during confrontations. Several officers were killed during this period, turning the gang into one of the most wanted criminal groups in America. Newspapers sensationalized every encounter, portraying Bonnie and Clyde as glamorous rebels. But the reality was far less romantic. The gang lived in constant fear, sleeping in fields, abandoned houses, and makeshift camps. They were exhausted, malnourished, and always on the move. Their lives were defined by paranoia, violence, and the knowledge that death could come at any moment. By early 1934, the gang was unraveling. Members were arrested, killed, or separated. Buck Barrow died from injuries sustained in a shootout. Blanche was captured. W.D. Jones left the gang. Clyde and Bonnie were increasingly isolated, relying on a shrinking network of allies. Their world was closing in, and they knew it. But Clyde had one final goal. 2 free inmates from Eastern Prison Farm, the place that had traumatized him. In January 1934, the gang raided the prison, killing a guard and freeing several inmates, including Henry Methvin. This act intensified the manhunt. Law enforcement agencies across multiple states coordinated their efforts, determined to end Bonnie and Clyde's reign once and for all. The gang's spree was reaching its violent climax. Their crimes had made them legends, but legends cannot outrun reality forever. The manhunt. Frank Hammer's pursuit. By early 1934, Bonnie and Clyde were among the most wanted criminals in America. Their crimes had crossed state lines, prompting law enforcement agencies to coordinate their efforts. The Texas Department of Corrections hired retired Texas Ranger Frank Hammer to track the couple. Hammer was experienced, relentless, and deeply familiar with the criminal landscape of the South. He studied Bonnie and Clyde's patterns, analyzing their routes, hideouts, and habits. Hammer realized that Bonnie and Clyde traveled in a predictable circle across Texas, Oklahoma, Arkansas, and Louisiana. They relied heavily on family connections, visiting relatives for food, shelter, and support. Hammer assembled a posse of experienced officers, including Maney Galt, Bob Alcorn, Ted Hinton, and Prentice Oakley. The group shadowed the gang for months, gathering intelligence and waiting for the perfect moment to strike. Bonnie and Clyde were exhausted. Their world had shrunk to a series of rural hideouts, stolen cars, and desperate escapes. They trusted few people, relying primarily on the Methvin family in Louisiana. Henry Methvin, freed during the Eastern Raid, became both an ally and a liability. His father, Ivy Methvin, played a crucial role in the events leading to the ambush. Hammer's posse tracked Bonnie and Clyde to Bingville Parish, Louisiana. They learned that the couple planned to meet Ivy Methvin on May 23, 1934. The officers set up an ambush on a quiet rural road near Sales. Hiding in the brush before dawn, they waited in silence, knowing that Bonnie and Clyde would arrive that morning. The manhunt had reached its final chapter. Bonnie and Clyde were unaware that their fate had already been sealed. They believed they were meeting an ally. Instead, they were driving into a trap designed by one of the most skilled lawmen in Texas history. The end was moments away. The ambush. May 23, 1934. The morning of May 23, 1934, was quiet in Bingville Parish, Louisiana. The sun had barely risen when Bonnie and Clyde approached the ambush site in their stolen Ford V8. The road was narrow, lined with tall pines and thick brush. It was the kind of rural stretch where a car could pass unnoticed for hours. But on this morning, 6 heavily armed officers were waiting in silence. Hidden behind the trees, watching the road with unwavering focus. Frank Hammer and his posse had arrived before dawn, positioning themselves strategically along the roadside. They knew Bonnie and Clyde would come. They had studied their habits, their routes, their loyalties. Every detail pointed to this moment. The Ford appeared in the distance, moving at a steady pace. Clyde was driving, as always. Bonnie sat beside him, unaware that death was seconds away. The officers recognized the car immediately. It slowed as it approached a truck parked on the side of the road, a truck belonging to Ivy placed there intentionally to force Clyde to reduce speed. The trap was perfect. Clyde eased off the accelerator, likely preparing to stop and speak with Finn. In that instant, the officers opened fire. The first shots shattered the morning calm, ripping through the windshield and striking Clyde before he could react. His foot slipped from the pedal, and the car rolled forward slowly, drifting toward the ditch. Bonnie screamed, a sound witnesses later described as haunting and unforgettable. The officers continued firing, unleashing a barrage of bullets that tore through the car. The glass, the metal, and the bodies inside. More than 130 rounds were fired in less than 2 minutes. The Ford was transformed into a twisted, smoking shell. When the gunfire finally stopped, the silence was overwhelming. Bonnie and Clyde were dead, their bodies slumped together in the front seat. Clyde had been killed instantly. Bonnie's death was slower, her final moments filled with terror and pain. The officers approached cautiously, weapons still drawn, but there was no movement inside the car. The reign of Bonnie and Clyde had ended in a violent storm of bullets. Word of the ambush spread quickly. Within minutes, crowds gathered at the scene, pushing past officers to glimpse the bodies of the infamous outlaws. Reporters arrived, snapping photos that would appear on front pages across the country. The legend of Bonnie and Clyde had reached its final chapter. Not with a dramatic escape, but with a brutal, overwhelming show of force. Their deaths marked the end of the public enemy era and signaled a new age of modern law enforcement. The myth was shattered. The reality lay broken in the front seat of a bullet-riddled Ford. Legacy, myth, memory, and the American dream. In the days following the ambush, Bonnie and Clyde's bodies were transported back to Texas, where thousands of people lined the streets to witness their funerals. Despite their violent crimes, they had become cultural icons. Symbols of rebellion during a time when Americans felt powerless. Their deaths sparked debates across the country. Some saw justice served. Others mourned the loss of 2 young lives consumed by desperation. Newspapers published dramatic accounts of their final moments, often exaggerating details to heighten the legend. Hollywood producers expressed immediate interest in adapting their story. The myth of Bonnie and Clyde was already taking shape. But the truth behind the myth was far more complex. Bonnie and Clyde were not glamorous rebels. They were 2 young people, shaped by poverty, trauma, and a world that offered them few opportunities. Their crimes were not clever heists, but chaotic acts of violence. Their escapes were not cinematic stunts, but desperate attempts to survive. Over the decades, their story has been retold in films, books, songs, and documentaries. The 1967 film Bonnie and Clyde, starring Warren Beatty and Faye Dunaway, romanticized their lives, transforming them into tragic anti-heroes. The movie's success cemented their place in American pop culture, shaping public perception for generations. But historians continue to emphasize the darker reality, the violence, the trauma, the suffering of victims, and the desperation that fueled the gang's actions. Bonnie's poetry, discovered after her death, offers a glimpse into her inner world. Her most famous poem, The Story of Bonnie and Clyde, reveals a woman who understood the inevitability of her fate. She wrote of loyalty, danger, and the knowledge that she and Clyde would never grow old. Her words humanize her, reminding us that behind the legend was a young woman who dreamed of something better. Clyde's legacy is equally complicated. He was a man shaped by hardship, abuse, and a deep sense of injustice. His hatred for the prison system drove many of his actions, including the Eastern Raid. He was loyal to his family, devoted to Bonnie, and determined to live life on his own terms, even if those terms led to destruction. Today, Bonnie and Clyde remain symbols of the darker side of the American dream, a reminder that desperation can turn into rebellion. Rebellion into violence, and violence into legend. Their story endures because it speaks to universal themes: love, fear, hope, and the desire to escape a world that feels impossible to survive. Their lives were short, chaotic, and tragic. But their legacy continues to fascinate, challenge, and haunt America nearly a century later. Thanks for watching. If this added value for you, a like goes a long way, and I'd love to hear your thoughts down in the comments. And hey, if you want to be part of what we're building here, hit subscribe to join the file archive. Catch you next time.